everybody, and welcome to That Yearbook podcast with those yearbook people. We are back for our third episode of our second season, and we're going to be talking a lot today about story writing, copywriting in yearbooks, which I know Jim and I, because we are yearbook nerds and we just talk about all this stuff in our free time, we are very passionate about this subject. So we have lots to talk to you guys about today. But first, before we jump in, Jim Jordan, how's it going, man? We saw each other for multiple weekends in a row at all of our Walsworth Elite weekends, and now I've had a whole weekend without hanging out with my buddy Jim. So
it was crazy.
What you been up to?
We had such a great time at the Elite weekends, and we just, all you advisors out there, first of all, start planning to go to Elite Weekend in 2025. Really is life-changing. We want to thank the advisors who were there, and really all the great kids. I mean, we've been doing these, our dear buddy Mike invented these years and years ago, and he's continued them. This is at least the probably 13th, 14th year we've done them at Walsworth, and they make such a difference in improving the quality of your book. But the kids just did fantastic work, don't you think?
It always blows me away. What people come in with when they're starting and what they leave with, sometimes that leap is just mind-blowing. It is, sometimes it's little tweaks that push it forward. Sometimes it's complete changes in themes and looks. And you never know. You never know what it's going to be. That's the exciting part. But yes, all of you students that were there, advisors that took the time to bring your students to Elite Weekends, we are so grateful. We just saw amazing work the entire time at all 4 Elite Weekends. It was every weekend we were just surprised all over again at what students and what you guys were coming up with. So we're so grateful that you joined us. We had a blast. We had a ball. Yeah. Yep. And so now we're back to our regularly scheduled programming.
But I do want to say the weekend we weren't together, this last weekend, I flew up to my sister's and up in Oregon, and the big event was we went to the Roll-Off Farm. Now, you may not know what the Roll-Off Farm is.
I do not.
But my son-in-law and my daughter sure did. I think the show, it's a reality TV show called Little People, Big World.
Oh, that's right. You told me about that.
So we met Matt and Amy Roloff. It was so much fun. And we had our granddaughter there, Hazel. So that was my non-yearbook weekend.
Oh, that's so nice. My non-yearbook weekend was spent escaping a storm in Florida.
Yeah, how you doing? How you doing? Do you know anything?
Oh, good. I mean, I had to evacuate. My home is in St. Pete, Florida, so it was right in that line of fire from Hurricane Milton, which Milton just sounds like the most unthreatening thing I've ever seen.
Yeah.
Not feel
Paradise Lost, I guess that
right.
works.
Yes, yeah, well, John Milton. But yes, I mean, I don't know, that just came out of nowhere and took us all by surprise. But so I left. That's why I'm not at home right now. And I actually have a former yearbook editor that is going to drive to my house and make sure that it's still there. And it's okay. And I'm sure it's fine. But thank you, former yearbook editors out there who are always willing to take care of your yearbook advisors. We appreciate it.
But this brings up a great point. Really, our topic we're going to be talking about now is the need to tell the story of your year, not just with photos, but with words. And the whole Milton story, I think, is a great example. You could have pictures of the Tropicana Dome with the roof fluttering in the air.
Yep.
You could have pictures of the water coming up or whatever. And that's what we're seeing on the news. But what we really want are the personal stories of what you saw, of what you experienced, how it felt to you and your family. And that really only can be done with words attached to the photos that you have. So it's really a combination. And when we talk about writing in a yearbook, first of all, the whole notion of journalism in yearbooks, whether you want to believe it or not, people, we are journalists, and this is a journalistic endeavor. You cannot make a yearbook and have it not be journalism on some level. So let's hear it for yearbook journalism. Yay.
Yes.
um,
So
so
important.
so you're going to be telling the stories to whatever degree you want in both words and photos. And we did, the metaphor we use all the time is that the photos really kind of tell the story of the now, and the writing is going to tell the story that you're going to want to read and savor over time. It may be, in 5 years, it may be in 50 years. And I always tell the story now of, I just had my 50th high school reunion. Actually, it was 51. It was last year.
Old high school reunion.
Insert old Jim joke. Although I'm changing
let it
this,
go.
we're changing it. Jim's not old, he's wise. How
He's
about
wise.
that?
He's very wise.
So in my junior year yearbook, they told the story about the bond election that failed in my community. And it talked about what cuts they were going to have to make to the school day based on that. Now, we would have totally forgotten what our senior year was like and why it was like it was had that story not appeared. And that story told the story of the bond election that failed, and they were going to be cutting sports. But guess what? They didn't cut sports, they cut academics. So we had a 6-period day my junior year, and in my senior year, we had a 5-period day. They lopped one period off of my school day. We started at 8:45 and ended at 2:05.
Yay for you guys.
except I never really learned how to write because of that. We kind of got hustled through our senior year. We had a lot of fun, but you wouldn't have remembered that had it not been in the yearbook. So,
Right.
we can tell the story.
Not been told. A photo is not going to give you all of those details. You need that story in there to document that moment.
That's right. And also in my story, in my yearbook, it told about our football championship, which we hadn't won since the 50s. It told about the 6th wrestling championship that we were a part of. So all those things were there. Now, there weren't the quotes and the focus on people that I would have liked, but there was information that has stood the test of time. And if you really get honest about it, if we don't record it in the yearbook, in that permanent yearbook, it's going to be forgotten. So it's really important.
It is so important. And the feedback, I'm sure you hear it too, Jim. I'm sure advisors out there, you probably hear this all the time, which is like, no one reads the stories anyways, right? Like I hear that constantly. Like, why are we writing all this? No one's reading this. And you're right. Like Jim said, like they might not be reading it right now, but they're going to read it later. You also have to remember the purpose of a yearbook. It is a historical document. So we want to make sure that the history is captured in the book of these major events that are happening. So yes, the stories, they might not be reading them right now, but they will read them later. But I would also challenge that if we're writing great stories that are interesting and about people, they will read them.
They will read
this
them.
does not mean that there needs to be a story, a long, in-depth story on every single spread in your book. In fact, I would probably say there shouldn't be an in-depth story on every single spread in your book. We should have different types of coverage. But when there is a story worth telling, take the time to tell it. Don't make a universal rule of, well, we don't do stories in our books. Like everyone should do stories in your books. They might look different from spread to spread, but there should still be those moments where we always take the time to showcase your ability, that you're able to write these long stories, but that you're able to find those moments that warrant and deserve a long feature story to really get that message across. There are those moments on every campus every year that deserve that treatment.
When I was advising, there were a couple of books that when they came into our yearbook room from around the country, that my students would grab them and immediately start reading them. One was the Susan Massey's book from Shawnee Mission Northwest, The Lair. They were so proud of the stories they were telling that my kids understood how great they were. The
Mm-hmm.
Hawberk from Shawnee Mission East, the same thing. It was high level writing. And
Mm-hmm.
again, I've said this many times. I was kind of a part-time yearbook guy, you know, 20% of my day, 80% of my life, that kind of a thing.
Yeah.
But I did teach a lot of English classes and graded a lot of English papers in my career. And what that taught me is this high level writing, you guys out there can do it.
Absolutely.
And you teachers out there, you may be an art teacher, you may be a social science teacher or something that's not a strict, writing based class. You can learn how to teach this. And
Mm-hmm.
I think the rewards of a great yearbook story are so deep and so rich. We don't want to give up on it because we may have written poor stories in the past that didn't say much.
Mm-hmm.
Um, don't let that be the excuse. And we want to let you know we're coming with some help. We have a little bit of a how-to video that we pair with these podcasts that's gonna come out, that's gonna give you a little formula that will help you get started on this path to better yearbook writing.
And I think that's a really good point. Getting started is the hardest part, right? Like I think sometimes the reasons why we don't put copy in yearbooks, or students, staffs, advisors are a little bit hesitant is because they really don't know how to do it. Like we don't even know how to
Yeah.
write. It's different. It's a totally different kind of writing. It's not creative writing. It's not your AP English writing. Like it is a different type of writing. So like how do we even do this and make it good? Make it something that people really want to read. So where do you even start? Like what's your I always it was always entertaining for me to watch students come in my classroom. They're coming from like, chem honors, chemistry honors. They're like on the other side of campus. They run across campus, they get to yearbook, they open up a blank Word document, they have their notes or
Ah,
interviews out there, and within a minute, they're like, I'm like, what's the problem? Like, I don't know what to write. I don't know how to do this. I was like, first of all, you've given it like 10 seconds. So like we need to give it a little bit more time. But two, part of that comes from like we just get intimidated by looking at that
blank
blank
page.
Word document, that blank
That's
computer
right.
screen. Like, I don't even know how to begin to tell this story. So what are some things that you guys do, or Jim, that you've done to get over that fear and just get started?
Well, first of all, I want to set up the whole writing scene as a coaching metaphor. Nobody should ever write totally alone. You should have, an assistant editor to help you, a
Yeah.
copy editor to help you. Um, just to let you know, first of all, what what they think would be a good thing to write about. So it's always going to start in two places. It's going to start with a conversation. Well, first of all, you're going to get a topic. Maybe you have to write on girls varsity volleyball. So there's your topic. Well, now you have to dig a little bit deeper and find out what your angle is going to be. And so this is where a coach might come in. Especially for a novice writer, you're going to have someone that's done this before who's going to sit down with you and say, okay, it's girls varsity volleyball. What do we know? What's going on there? Who are the best players? What happened last year be in contrast to what's happening this year? What is making this team good or great, or what was the major game that they had that meant something? So there's just going to be a lot of discussion about possibilities. And when you get there, you might decide, okay, we'll kind of go in this general direction. What might my reader want to know about this topic? And there's all these things you can do, as you said in our next video, um, a lot of pre-work you need to do. And talk a little bit about what are some of those other
Yeah.
things you can do.
So I was going to say I really like the team mentality, because sometimes when if I ever sat down to write a story, I didn't know where to begin. Sometimes it helps to just talk it out first. Don't
Hmm.
feel like you immediately have to start writing, and maybe you just need to sit with your editor or sit with another staff member and just be like, okay, let me just like talk this out for a second and figure out what this story is about. Here's the interview I got. Here's the person I talked to. Here's the topic. They told me about this, and just get a little back and forth. Have them question you and ask you questions about what you found out. That might actually help you as the writer to realize, wow, maybe I don't know enough yet to even start
Hmm.
writing. Maybe I
Yep.
have to go back and ask some more questions. But that really can't happen when it's just you and the computer screen, right? Like you need
Mm-mm.
a partner to be able to have that discussion and have that give and take and have them point out things to you and have you evaluate what you know. And sometimes just speaking it out loud helps us make sense of things. Like
That's
if you've
right.
ever had a problem and you're like, all those things are like swirling around in your head, and then you talk to your best friend and all of a sudden you feel better because you were able to like kind of talk it out a little bit. So we kind of have to do the same thing with story writing. You got to talk it out with somebody. And also remember, no writing equals no writing. Like if you don't write anything, you're never going to get anywhere. It does not have to be perfect the first
No.
time around. Get something down on that computer screen. It could be basically gibberish, but at least you got something, like at least you got something down there. So don't be afraid to just start somewhere. I think we often, and myself, I get this way too, where you feel like you have to start and it has to be like this. Whatever I write, this first sentence, that's it. Like that's the lead. It's permanent. It's not permanent. Click
No.
that delete button, change it around. Like it's going to probably go through multiple revisions, but no writing equals no writing. So just get started somewhere.
And then this idea of teamwork too is if you have someone that's done it before that can come alongside the beginning writer and say, well, let's think about this and why not try this? And this brings up an important point about your yearbook period. Oh my goodness. Your yearbook period, editors, is for coaching your staff. Your
Mhm.
yearbook period is not just doing your own work. You need to be checking in and how's that story going? And can you tell me about your interview? Can you tell me where you think it's going? Let's brainstorm together. And then the probably the best thing an editor can ever say is, how can I help you? Because
Mhm.
I think one of the greatest mistakes that editors make and advisors make it too is we expect people to know how to do things we haven't taught them how to do. There
Mhm.
needs to be a lot of showing, a lot of partnering, a lot of discussion so they get the idea of how you want it done. Not
Mhm.
just, hey, write something and let me tell you how terrible it is. Take them
Exactly.
through step by step by step. That will make all the difference in the world.
Hmm. And it's a practice thing. Like writing is a skill, just like anything else. The more you do it, the better you get at it. So for all of you new writers out there, or maybe you're on a staff where like, hey, we haven't done stories in the past, but we're gonna do it this year, which is what we want to see. Um, don't be afraid. Like it's not going to be perfect the first time out there. Like it's going to be a process. Study other people's writing. That's always a great place to start. Read other, normally we don't say like look to other yearbooks for like visual inspiration because it's been done already, but there's nothing wrong with studying other stories to see just how they write and what that language is like. And then, like you said, just try something, have that coach there that's going to help you make it better, but just getting something down on paper and then being yourself. Like this is a totally different type of writing. We want to hear the authentic you, not you Googling it and finding a thesaurus so you can sound smart or sound like a New York Times reporter or sound like we want it to sound like you. We want it to be your voice. And the beauty of journalistic writing is that it's really all about telling other people's stories, right?
That's right.
So the beauty of this style of writing is the quotes do most of the storytelling for us, right? If we did a great interview, and I've said this before, 80% of writing is the interview. If you can get a great interview, this part of the writing process kind of becomes easy. Like you've got a formula, you've got your quotes, the quotes are doing the storytelling. We're just in there to kind of fill in those blanks and make sure that story gets across to the reader in an engaging way. So it's not, I think sometimes we put too much pressure on ourselves. Like
That's right.
it has to be so perfect, and it doesn't. It just needs to be authentically you.
And I just want to say, you always start with what is the story that needs to be told? What is the story that the audience is going to want to hear? What is the information we want to save and remember about this particular year? And then we also get into, this is one of our general things about yearbook storytelling. You figure out what the story is, and then you figure out what's the best method to tell it. Sometimes it might be 4 quotes and a series of pictures. Sometimes it might be a 600-word story. I always tell the story now because it's fresh in my mind. Jupiter High School, they had a teacher at their school last year who fell in love with Barbara Kingsolver's Demon Copperhead, and she wrote the author about this. And they went back and forth. And finally, the author, the Pulitzer Prize winning author, sent this teacher a class set of books. And the class read them. And that's a long form story that needs to be told in more than just 4 quotes. So they were able, and I love this about that book because they have a lot of weekly coverage, boop, 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 short things. And then boom, we went to this long form story. That was a big part of the year. That was a major story. So you as storytellers, you're going to figure out what's the best way, but don't forget the long form, the story that's a lead quote, transition quote with based on interviews. Don't forget that method either.
That's right. We used to call, when you were talking about before, like, what do people care about? What's important? What's the story we want to tell? And asking yourself those questions. We used to call that the who cares method. Do you care? Would you want to read this story? Are you interested? If you're banging your head against the wall because you don't even want to write the story because it's that boring, nobody's going to want to read it either. So then what are we doing here, right? Find those moments that you are actually curious about. Like if you feel like, oh, I kind of want to know more, what's happening there, then go tell that story. I had a student one time that I'll never forget her busting back in the yearbook classroom. And she's like, I changed my whole angle. And I was like, what happened? Like that story was almost done. And now we're changing the whole thing. She was interviewing a student for something else, and she was naturally curious, which is always a good journalistic quality. And she saw scissors and like sewing materials in this girl's backpack. And so she just asked, like, what's that for? And so they started talking, and apparently this girl and her group of friends designed their own costumes for Comic-Con, for like cosplay and stuff. And they didn't just design them, they like made them. They sewed them, they created, and they were insane. Like they were so detailed. So she found this such a cool story that she got excited about writing. Like she's like, this is so much better than what I was going to write about. She was curious. She wanted to know more. She interviewed them. We got them in their costumes and did a whole photo shoot with them in their costumes. It was, and I still remember that. And that spread's probably like 12, 13 years old, but I remember it. Right. Because it was a good story, but she was curious and she was excited about writing it. So find those moments that you're excited about telling that story.
When we were out doing our elite weekends, we talked to a lot of kids about what's happening with cell phones on their campus.
Yes.
And
massive changes.
It was all over the place. Some had semi-strict rules. Some had you can't use them at all. And then there was all sorts of really personal things that students were saying about it. In one school, they noticed that they were talking to each other and looking at each other. And
Crazy.
it was but the amazing thing for this, 16, 17-year-old kid,
That's
it
a big
was
deal.
it was profound what they
Mhm.
noticed. And so, I want to hear that quote. And then on the other hand, there were certain places where they weren't really enforcing it, and it was kind of
Mhm.
a little bit of a joke. And so I want to get that flavor of what it was
Mhm.
like at your school. I know in Florida now, maybe every school, if not it's close, there's metal detectors.
Mhm.
And so
A lot of
by
them.
state law. So
Yep.
how are you dealing with that? How does it make you feel? And
Mhm.
that's something that only can be captured now, this year. And those are the kind of stories you want to tell. Now certainly
Mhm.
there's going to be someone that's overcoming an illness, or there's going to be a great triumph of a sports team. You got to tell those too. And some of them are going to be long form stories, but dig deep to find the stories and then figure out how to tell them best.
Yes. So I agree. And I think sometimes part of the reason again why we get nervous about these things and we're afraid of making mistakes. So what are some mistakes or like what are like especially with all of your years of
Yeah,
wisdom, Jim Jordan,
sure.
with
Yeah.
with yearbooks, what are some of the most like common pitfalls or mistakes that you see
Yeah, the
staff
most common
making when writing
mistake,
stories?
yeah, the most common thing is you try to tell everything about the thing you're talking
Mhm.
about. You don't really focus. As my friend Pete LeBlanc used to say, he believes in piece of the pie journalism,
I love
where
that analogy.
where
Yeah.
you focus on one slice. You don't eat it all and get sick or whatever. You
Mhm.
focus on what the most important part is, and that is a mistake that people make. They try to cover too much. They go wide, not
Mhm.
deep.
Yes.
So you want the stories that you tell to be deep. Another one is you don't interview hard. You rely on a text, you rely on a form that you hand out, you get lazy, you try to write a story without even talking to anybody.
We
That's
call
when
that
it,
butt
but
journalism.
journalism, yeah.
That's butt
We,
journalism. When you sit on your butt and you don't go talk to people, that's
yeah.
not that's butt journalism. We don't deal in that. Okay. We got to get up and out there and talking to people. That's where you find those stories.
And I will tell you this, after all my years, some of my greatest triumphs as a teacher was when you got kids out of their comfort zone and got them comfortable with talking to people they didn't know, to make them feel valued, to make them talk to you about what's important to them. That's a skill that you will
Mhm.
take everywhere you go for the rest of your life. Can you sit down and find the story that they have to tell? And I really believe this. Any of you out there, if I spent 20 minutes with you, I could come up with a story that would be yearbook worthy. Everybody has
Mhm.
a story. Every team has a story. Every part of your school day has a story. All you have to do is find it. And I'm going to get all weepy eyed about this. This is what I love about yearbooks so much.
Mhm.
You're trying to find that perfect photo. You're trying to design something that's beautiful that no one's ever seen before. And then you're trying to find these stories that nobody else would tell unless you found them. This is the beauty of yearbooking all
Yes.
these great things. It's not slapping stuff on a page to fill 280 pages.
Mhm.
It's really trying to tell the story of the year in as much detail as you can. That's a beautiful thing.
It is a beautiful thing. I love that you get so excited about that. That's the I because I'm the same way. Like I feel like and you students out there listening to this, if you've never had that moment where like you found a story, like you're talking to someone and you have that moment where you're like, "Oh my gosh, this is cool." And you naturally find yourself curious to ask more questions and you want to know more and you're excited to be able to tell that person's story and put that into print for forever, in a document that is going to be held on to for forever. There's nothing like it. That's an exciting moment. And there's also something to be said of telling other people's stories, like that story I was talking about those cosplay Comic-Con kids. Those kids were so excited to have their story told because they weren't in student council. They weren't on NHS. They weren't, playing basketball. This is what they did. And it wasn't an on-campus thing. And so for them to have their story told was like a magical moment. When that magic happens, there's nothing like it. I'm telling you. So yes, definitely dive in. But like Jim said, one of those biggest pitfalls, I agree, is not getting the interview. I think sometimes students, y'all think that you're like, I'm not a good writer because the story isn't good. That doesn't mean you're not a good writer. That means you didn't get the interview. So in this type of writing, go get more interviews, go talk to more people. That's going to naturally make that story better.
As we wrap this up, and you can tell we could talk about writing forever.
We can.
I'm gonna turn this into a meme, into a sound bite. Let's just put it this way. Be curious, find the story.
Absolutely. Yes, find the story. And remember, everybody has a story to tell. So keep looking, talking to people, finding those unique experiences that people have. Don't always think in terms of just school stuff. Think in terms of people stuff. What are obstacles? What are things that people are passionate about? What's their experience been? What gets them excited? What gets them emotional? Ask these questions and find these stories, and people will read them in your books. If we find those great stories, people will read those stories.
We can't wait to see how you're going to jump into this storytelling, and we can't wait to read the amazing stories you're going to tell.
Yes.
We're excited about it. And what we want when we're around next year, we want you to come up to us and say, Jim, Sabrina, Mike, you got to see these stories. You never would have believed we found this one. It's so great.
Yes, absolutely. And don't hesitate to go and watch the how-to training video that goes with this podcast. That is all about the simple formula for writing. There's a method to all of this. Who knew? Yes.
It's teachable. It's learnable.
It's not as hard as you think. Yep. No. Just takes a little practice, but you guys, we know everybody out there can do it. We've seen it. We know you can do it. We believe in you. We know those stories are on your campuses. Just go find them. Watch our podcast. There will also be some resources, additional stories that follow this formula that you can study that will be partnered with the training video as well. So we're here for you. We want to give you whatever you need to go tell those stories on your campus, and we're excited to see what you guys find.
That's right. Be curious, find the story, and write it.
Yes. Thank you, guys. We appreciate you always. Thank you for tuning in to That Yearbook podcast. Be sure to subscribe and leave us a review on your preferred platform. Happy yearbooking.